Well, we welcome you back again in our conversation with Mr. Refilwe Nzekh of the Democratic Alliance. We will then continue. I think when we went on break, we touched on the issue of the church as the constituency and whether the DA had a place for the church in its standing and in terms of the constituency that you perhaps wanting to reach. And then you made a comment about your personal stand as a born-again Christian. I just want to touch briefly before we move on, for those viewers who might be watching and who feel they have a passion for politics, they have a passion for governance issues, but perhaps because the church has not yet gotten that vision to say we are not called only on a Sunday church, four walls, but we are actually called to impact the nation. And just maybe share very briefly what your journey has been and what you have found as a Christian in Democratic Alliance, maybe in politics.
Yeah, I think, politics is a tricky arena to play in. And it's important that we always remember that tolerance of other must be your foundation. Because you could find yourself thinking that you must be God and condemn, which is not where we're supposed to be. I think it's important. In fact, if I think of another interview that I did recently, as recent as 2 days ago, was a lady who was on air condemning, saying corruption is actually caused by homosexuality, etc., etc. And I think I want to caution against that, because when you start saying we are taking on that space, we're actually starting to say we've elevated ourselves to God, And I remember saying to that lady, if you're a Christian woman who's praying, I'd rather you pray for people versus making a decision on behalf of people. And what the DA says is we are a party for all, and all being, I'm going to particularly because we're now on a religious platform, we accommodate all religions and allow people to be free to be who they are. Obviously, if you are going to go into a church, you need to respect God as you go into that space. Similarly, if I invited you as a Christian and you were invited to a Buddhist monastery, it's up to you to make that decision to say, will you accept the invitation to go into a Buddhist monastery and, that thing of when in Rome, do like the Romans do, so that you don't find yourself contradicting their way of life. So I think the underpinning role within the DA is, because we are such a diverse organization with people who come from multiple backgrounds, we respect the individual, especially in their private space.
Let's come back.
But we are united by values that talk to, if you look at our values, which we launched recently, we talked about fairness. What is fair society? Things like children shouldn't go to school and there's no textbooks. When you're talking in open space, we then talk to what is open and what does that mean? And we talk to freedom. What are our freedoms? Remember, there's also freedom with responsibility. How do you make sure that if I'm talking about my religion, it's not going to insult somebody else? Because there's somebody who could take it very badly that I'm a Christian. However, I need to know who I'm talking to so that my tone in terms of the message to that person is relevant to them. It's not everywhere I go being a Christian that I'm going to say I'm a Christian in Jesus and my Lord and Savior. However, I think in what comes out of my mouth, people must be able to extrapolate and say, that's a child of God speaking.
Coming to this point of values, I think that the last statistics that were taken had said that about 79% of South Africa is a Christian country.
Correct.
And we might know that perhaps that might define it. People define that differently in a different space. But now let's come back to this base. So if you have 80% supposedly of a nation being Christian, which obviously then is undergirded by their own values.
Correct.
As the church, and will then have their own needs as the church. Does the DA have a stance on that in terms of maybe targeting that particular church constituency in whether it's manifesto or characters or values that you are basing to make sure that the constitution itself or the constituency itself doesn't feel left out in the day-to-day programs that you run?
I think the main line is include, not exclude.
Okay, elaborate on that.
Yeah. Let me make it this way. We believe we must always make room for everybody to feel they belong, a sense of belonging when you're within the DA. So our base is ensuring that no matter from which religion you come from, even atheists are in the DA. We have people that say, I don't believe there's a God. But there is a common thread with us in terms of the values that the DA puts that everybody can align with. So those values talk to inclusivity versus excluding others. When you talk about some things that talk to things like non-racialism, they talk to open opportunity. I was talking about the values that were launched last year. We talk about freedom, fairness, and opportunity. What is an opportunity? An opportunity to practice whatever your religion is in your private space. Freedom with responsibility. What is freedom? How do you tell somebody that you're free to study, but you don't have access to funding to do that study? Are you really free? Then we talk about fairness. How do you define fairness? Is it fair to say you're going to school, but there's actually no textbooks in that classroom? So those are some of the things that talk to the three key values that underpin the DA today.
Well, we obviously, as we going towards local government elections, it's obviously the election for councillors. Is there a code of conduct?
Yes.
Or ethics? Because I mean, morality is one of our biggest issues in South Africa. You know, there's always the earlier on when you were talking about education, there's always the education that just addresses numeracy and literacy.
Yeah.
But the bigger part of education is morality issue, which is always underground. But now we want to find out what is that code of conduct that would govern, because I think even as people go to the polls to vote, you know, one wants to have some sort of comfort that at least the people that we are voting for stand for a certain code of conduct and ethics.
Look, we definitely have a code of conduct. It's quite a lengthy document. Mm-hmm. Even our councillors have a code of conduct. Me as an MPL in Gauteng also have a code of conduct. But I mean, for example, I can't just go and drink and go and drive. There's a way that I must behave which people must be able to respect me and know that this is an elected member of the public who represents my views and the challenges I have in society. Mm-hmm. So we do have a code of conduct. We have performance assessments as well that talk to what are you doing to uplift and empower your community. Mm-hmm. A very basic thing with councillors. Obviously, councillors are elected in order to make sure that the service delivery on the ground. Mm-hmm. And they make laws in councils. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people don't even realize that when you're a councillor and you sit in a council meeting, one of the things that happens there is the bylaws of the municipality, mm-hmm. which fits in with the greater constitution and the rest of the laws. So if you're, for example, a DA councillor and you found a law that there was a gap in terms of the law or a bylaw that needed to be implemented, you put it down in the form of a motion. And obviously it gets discussed in caucus, and caucus is when all DA councillors get together to discuss your particular motion. A motion is like a suggestion of what a law could be. For example, the law could be dressing appropriately for a council meeting. Because I don't know if anybody wants to be wearing hot pants into a council meeting, you know? So then you put it together and you go to a council meeting and it's tabled and then it's voted for or voted against. So there is an impact you can make. So without necessarily saying, I'm a Christian, this is how I think South Africa should be going, you could be looking at morality and saying, if children were taken, for example, we talk about the role of fathers in South Africa. We can see, if you look at criminality, substance abuse, a lot of it is children who come from families with absentee fathers, where it's just the single mother battling to actually raise boys and girls. And because they don't have proper social cohesion and understanding what the role the father would have played, that can even be put into a form of emotion. So there is a way to actually bring your own values, discuss it, and then take it forward so that it can pass as legislation, for lack of a better word.
Take us through very briefly maybe the process, and I know that you've just briefly went through the general part of there is a code of conduct for councillors, but just take us through the process. So I don't know, maybe I'm assuming that obviously the councillors get elected at your branch level.
No.
Or yours is okay. No. Can you just run that through so that we can come to
yeah, people tend to lump us with
Yeah.
the ANC, which is actually the flaw of how DA works. What happens in the DA?
Because let me just because I just want us to understand, so that as we are busy addressing these issues of maybe the church needs, and I mean one of those is to be able to vote consciously and knowing that these are people that have been vetoed. So that's why I'm asking that question, so that maybe you can take us through that process to say what is the process that you go through in appointing councillors before that.
What we do, first of all, we appoint the people that appoint. Okay. So you will find you have a regional, say Gauteng, because it's quite big. The city of Johannesburg is a region. So Tshwane is another region, Ekurhuleni is another region, West Rand is another region. So the region has a regional meeting, and obviously at the regional meeting is members from the different branches that are represented, and they elect people that will sit on what is called an electoral college. That is the first process. And then another level is called the selection panel. So you go through an election process, and it's just to make sure you're competent in order to stand to become a councillor. Then you move to the next level, which is your selection panel. And at the selection panel, it's actually like about 12 people appointed by the region, which represent branches. Because obviously you can't have all the branches standing there.
And when you say competence, what are you looking at in terms of technical competence or what?
Across the board.
So that would go from your social skill
Correct.
right up to your technical
Yeah.
competency level.
But your selection panel, generally what we do is, because of a growing organization, we sit with head office and they will generate a general questionnaire that talks to what are we looking for as the qualities of a councillor. The first thing is to make sure the person understands the values of the DA. If you don't understand what freedom, fairness, and opportunity talk to, already there's a challenge. If you don't understand the vision of the organization, for example, that you are not, just because you're a child of a domestic worker does not mean you can't become a doctor tomorrow. Those are some of the visions that we have in the organization. So you must understand the values, the vision of the organization. Then also we look at core skills. Because people think councillors are just politicians, but it goes beyond. Sometimes you need somebody who's able to work with the community. Sometimes you need somebody who's financially savvy. Because you need to build a diverse pool of skills for a municipality. So you go through those. So once that, for example, in Ekurhuleni we had about 200 people go through the electoral college. We interviewed 200 people as part of the selection panel. It then goes to FedEx to ratify to the Provincial Electoral Commission. So then it's ratified at that level. From there it goes to FedEx, which is our federal structure, to also ratify. So all those processes are taken into consideration. And then you're ranked, obviously.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to have that understanding, because you know, I mean, as a born again believer who is also a patriot, to say, you know, so you always have your desire of linking the two. And I mean, you've said earlier on, and we can look at it and see when you talked about the issues of family, which was now bringing me to another value, because we are now wanting to talk about the issues or the values perhaps that the church as the constituency might want to see, and whether the Democratic Alliance has a stance. And one of those cohorts is, as you touched in passing, is the value of family.
Absolutely.
You know, because with all some of the issues that we have discussed are issues that when you look at it, the bottom falls off there. It falls off in a family structure. We talk about issues of corruption. When we talk about issues of lack of morality or no standing, we are talking about issues that fall at the bottom. Yet maybe somehow, and you're most allowed to argue my point as I'm putting it forward. Sometimes you do not hear a strong stance on any political party, now from a person who is Christian, born again, that gives a stand. What is our stance when it comes to rebuilding the family structures? Because it's great and well that we have an economic policy. It deals with economic issues. We have an education policy that only deals with numeracy and literacy. We have labor issues. We have all these things that we have policies in place. We talked about the PMFA, all of those, supply chain. Yet there is nobody who looks into the glue that brings the country together. Maybe the missing puzzle that says 22 years into a democratic, because we thought this was our Canaan, our promised land as South Africa. And we entered 1994, we've reached the promised land, but now things are becoming undone.
Shambles.
There's a problem underneath. And sometimes we don't hear the voice, maybe even speaking on behalf of the church, that comes forward from any political party that says, this is our stand on the family issues. But somehow it always seems like every point or every stance that's being taken by government and other political parties is always behind. No, but the constitution says, you know, the children can have sex at 16, and you can't discipline the child in this way, and not to say that there hasn't been wrong ways where it's been abused, but the very things that then get promoted make it difficult today to build a family structure that will hold the family together. What are your thoughts, views as the DA on the issue of family?
Look, you cannot deny that a family structure is the base. It's actually the foundation. If you don't have a proper foundation, your walls are about to lean over. And if you look at from a social perspective, which then comes from morality and family and where God is, children who go into substance abuse, school dropouts, if you look at the researchers that are, even now we're talking about blessers on the streets. If you look at a lot of the research that is also being conducted, you will find that a lot of these young girls who have sexual relationships with older men tend to have absentee fathers. So we can't deny that family is the absolute structure that is needed. And one of the things we need to start saying is we need to recognize that there is a reality in South Africa of single mothers. How do you then bring in fatherly role models? And you can't deny that sometimes there was the role where the church has to play. Because if you're I'm a single mom, I'm not gonna lie. I was married for various reasons, life gave me challenges, but I'm raising boys. And where do they get their socialization? It's in the church environment. Where do they find their male role models? It's in the church environment. So because then the mentors become the male pastors in the church for them. Because that's where I want them to go.
So the church...
In fact, even if you look at drugs, one of the things we've been saying is we need to get the churches active. Because if we find other ways of dealing with drugs, in fact, they will say, there was even a research done that says, where you've got churches active with substance abuse rehabilitation, people have a higher chance of rehabilitation.
So you see, on exactly this point that you have raised, I'll tell you what becomes some of the challenges in discussion. Is that on the one hand, I guess there's a confirmation to know that there definitely is a place for the church to have a voice on matters pertaining to morality. And that is across the board, whether it's from the ruling party or any other political party. But then you seem to find a contradiction, because at the same time, while the political parties are acknowledging the fact that the church is keen in playing that role, they want to define how the church should play that role. And I'll use an example. Like I'm gonna go into controversial things now. I'll use an example of children can actively participate in sex when they're 16. And they have a right to do that. It's their God-given right, because we are a country of rights. I don't know where the responsibilities have gone to, but it seems right. So at the same time, the church can't have a say about the very issue that is killing the nation.
But I don't understand why the church can't have a say in that.
Because it always comes back to that when the church makes a stand on those issues, then again there's an accusation of you're judging the society, you're not allowing people to be who they want to be, and it's a young person, it's her life, and this is what they want. And now if you come and you say based on the Bible that a person can have sex when they're not married, then all of a sudden you're bringing a morality issue that says you want to now impose on the nation. On the basis.
But if you look at, I want to actually bring you back to Helen's statement that she made, that actually if you have one partner, and generally one partner tends to be within the context of a marriage, you would have found that we would have actually decreased the prevalence of infection of HIV and AIDS. So there is a role for churches to play.
But I agree, because you and I know in this room, technically that's a great statement. But the thing is, in practice, how good is that statement being? Because you see, and I'm looking at it now.
It is a reality that if you encourage people to have a single partner, even scientists are saying, advocate for a single partner, and generally a single partner is normally in the space of a marriage, because now this is the person you've committed to.
Yes, and we're not disputing that. I'm not disputing that. I just want us to throw into the place of there is a one or a wish list of how we should be doing things, right?
Yeah.
But then there is an issue of dealing with the morality of human beings.
Yeah.
And as we spoke earlier on, that even when you talk about values, you're talking about values that come from a certain grounding. Whether for a Christian, you're talking about the Bible as your basis, or a Muslim who gets his basis for your values from
the
a
Quran.
Whatever. Because you can't just say, I'm a good person. It's impossible. We know in terms of the nature of man, from a Christian point of view. That's why we can put the policies that we've put. And South Africa has one of the best policies, I agree. But the fact that those policies are not giving us a better country right now says it addresses the issue of morality of man.
Do you know one of the challenges is also the fact that the implementation has never been done properly?
What does it take to implement properly?
If you look at the social cohesion, even if you look at the drug master plan, it talks about the inclusion of religious organization. But not enough has been done to say, let's tap on the churches and say, after school, can the children come and have a social cohesion program? But they're there.
And you know partly why?
In the policy.
You know partly why? It goes back to that sensitivity of, because when you come to Christianity, it is a religion, and as much as I hate to use the word religion, it is a religion that does not compromise. It has black and white, right? Because then we're talking to a constituency for us to begin to argue. One of the reasons why it's easy for a Muslim or somebody else who come and make a stand and nobody will have a hoo-ha about it. But when you talk about a Christian, because you talk about a Christian and a God who says there's only one God, that alone is uncompromising. And then you talk about a God who gives a definite absolute. He's not a relative God. Whatever feels good to you, it's either this. If it's this, it's wrong. If it's this, it's right. And I think that's one of the reasons why when even government have pulled in so-called faith-based, which now is the faith-based organizations, and because you must all come into, and then the issue that I was bringing in to say they call on, and the problem they have with the church is that you present a voice that's uncompromising. And it can't compromise because the Bible, which is the constitution of the church, is uncompromising. And so that's why when they call you, then they want to define for you, this is how you must do it. And this is what brings the problem for the church as the constituency.
I think I hear where you're coming from. However, I think there is a context where like I say, I think because I sit in social development, and a lot of the times we look at social issues. I use the example of substance abuse. I use the example of young men being raised without father figures. And more, there's a realization that unless you address the social issues, you're not going to deal with the problems. And ultimately, those social issues then build on and lead to corruption and other things.
Do you think there's a space to, well, obviously, because you're wearing your hat as the Democratic Alliance, and even generally within the political landscape, perhaps, because there's a whole lot of things that we have implemented. Yes, rightfully, we are grateful for where we are. It is as hard as it must be, but it's still much better than where we were before. But is there a space, because there are policies and things that have been put in place that obviously have not given us results? Is there a space where there will be an openness to engage the church? Maybe even the church on its own has had problems in maybe not knowing how to converse with political parties, maybe. So I'm not taking that away, that perhaps even the church, there is places where we've missed it somewhere. But is there a space open where there can be those discussions once more to begin to partner? You talked about the triple P, was it the partnership, private-public partnership in the context of job creation and business?
Yeah.
Is there a space where the Democratic Alliance is to open that, to begin those discussions with the church, particularly in issues of social development, which actually addresses the issues of morality?
Absolutely.
In that. What's your take on that?
No, there definitely is. I think even, you talked about even broader politics and engaging parties. You know, whenever a bill is passed, it goes from one paper to another paper to another paper. And I've never seen the church engaging in that space.
Okay.
You know? And I think those are some of the opportunities that lay for churches to be able to intervene and say, wait, this legislation is not working, when they propose bills, you know. And it doesn't have to be just the social things, even if it's on the economical things, and you start looking at it and interrogating them and say, actually no, before you pass this bill, while you have public participation, why are the churches not more visible in public participation forums? I think that's where one of the things that I think has been, can I say, a weakness of the churches, to say we want to see politics thrive. However, there is a way and there is a place for the voice of the churches to be heard. And when you have public participation forums, before bills become bills, while it's still proposals on paper, there is a gap where we haven't seen the churches coming in.
All right, perhaps our last question before I give you an opportunity to close and speak to the viewers. As we had alluded earlier on, that I think the last statistics that were done, where religion was part of that, was 79% of the country is Christian. What is the DA doing, perhaps, if anything, to appeal to the church, the Christian community?
I think I'm going to say to you that we don't want to focus on saying we're just appealing to one, because even within Christians, there are multiple disciplines. So we would rather appeal to fellow South Africans as a whole and say, this is the offering, this is what this is what this party is about. Because we don't want to start saying we're segregating South Africans and defining them by racial groups. We actually want one race, which is the South African race.
All right. Well, we'll give an opportunity to speak to the viewers as we conclude this session. Once more, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me
on. Just let them know, in closing, what is it that you want to leave them with as they're going towards the 3rd of August?
I think the most important thing for us is to ensure that when you look at the DA and what it stands for, it's about making sure that we have a country where people are tolerant of each other, where people can live side by side, irrespective of whatever racial group, cultural group, religious organization they come out of, and they're free to express their views as long as their views don't actually hurt the next person. And then you also talk, that's what we talk about, freedom with responsibility. And then you also want to make sure that economically South Africa starts thriving again. Because when you have an economy that is not thriving, then we start seeing increases in crime and other illnesses in our society. So we want to see that we eradicate corruption, basic service delivery happens on the ground, and ultimately we create jobs and restore dignity for those people who have felt left out of South Africa today.
Well, there you have it to you, our viewers, and I want to leave you with these very sober words. As you've heard in our discussions, that part of the weaknesses perhaps of the church is having failed to participate in issues of governance and where the opportunities have been created by the Constitution. So this is really a call for us to begin to actively engage. Prayer alone is not going to move us forward. Prayer is the first foundation, but we've got to pray and we've got to work and we've got to pull our hands together. So with that being said, I trust that you will really begin to think deeper about your calling as a Christian, not only in a church on Sunday, but also day to day, being involved in your community, being involved in your country, in the city, and where there's opportunities for you to make a voice heard, make that voice heard. And so thank you so much for being with us. Please remember that we are voting on the 3rd of August. Please make sure that you have checked out all the details that you need to check out to register. And you can go onto the IEC website, www.elections.org.za, so that you are not disappointed. Bless you.